My name is Harper Williams, and for 2 years I've been the ghost of Morrison and Associates. At 25, I'm the youngest financial analyst in our Chicago office, and apparently the most forgettable one too. Every morning, I'd arrive at our downtown office building at 7:30 a.m., a full hour before anyone else. I'd sit at my corner desk, the one tucked behind the printer that everyone pretends doesn't exist, and dive into spreadsheets that most people would find mind-numbingly boring. But I loved the numbers. They told stories that words couldn't capture, revealed patterns that others missed. The problem wasn't my work. The problem was that nobody seemed to notice I existed. Harper, can you pull the quarterly reports for the Henderson account? Marcus Reynolds would bark from across the office, not even looking up from his phone. Marcus was our director of client relations, a 35-year-old guy who wore expensive suits and had the kind of confidence that came from never being told he was wrong. I'd spend hours crafting detailed analyses, finding cost-saving opportunities, identifying revenue streams that others had overlooked. Then I'd email my findings to Marcus, who would present them in meetings as his own insights. "Great work, team," he'd say, taking credit for discoveries that had kept me up until midnight. This had been my reality for 24 months. I was the engine behind half the successful strategies our company implemented, but I was invisible in every meeting, overlooked for every promotion, and excluded from every important conversation. Morrison and Associates was a mid-sized financial consulting firm that helped struggling businesses restructure their operations. We had about 40 employees, and our office occupied 2 floors of a glass tower in the Loop. For years, we'd been the go-to firm for companies in crisis, but lately, we'd become the company in crisis. The signs had been obvious for months. Clients were leaving, contracts weren't being renewed, and there were whispered conversations behind closed doors. I noticed it in the numbers long before anyone else. Our accounts receivable was climbing, our cash flow was deteriorating, and our overhead costs were spiraling out of control. But when I tried to bring these concerns to my supervisor, Janet, she'd brush me off. "Harper, honey, let the senior analysts worry about the big picture. You just focus on your assigned accounts." So I did what I always did. I kept my head down and worked harder. But this time I was working on something different. Something that nobody had asked me to do. Something that could change everything. 6 months ago, I'd started staying late not just to finish my regular work, but to analyze our entire company's financial structure. I'd been building a comprehensive model of Morrison and Associates' finances, identifying exactly where we're bleeding money and developing a detailed plan for recovery. It started as curiosity, then became an obsession. I'd mapped out every expense, every revenue stream, every inefficiency. I'd researched comparable companies that had survived similar crises, studied their strategies, and adapted their solutions to our specific situation. The more I dug, the more I realized that our problems weren't insurmountable. We weren't doomed to failure, we were just poorly managed. With the right restructuring plan, the right cost controls, and the right investor, Morrison and Associates could not only survive but thrive. But who was going to listen to Harper Williams, the invisible analyst in the corner? Last Friday, everything changed. Robert Morrison, our CEO and the company's founder, called an emergency all-hands meeting for Monday morning. The email was brief and ominous: mandatory attendance. "We need to discuss the future of Morrison and Associates." Over the weekend, rumors flew through our work group chat. Some people thought we were being acquired. Others whispered about mass layoffs. The pessimists, and there were many, were convinced we were about to hear about the company's bankruptcy. I spent that weekend putting the finishing touches on my analysis. If this meeting was going to be about our company's survival, then maybe, just maybe, it was time for the invisible employee to finally speak up. Monday morning arrived gray and cold, typical for Chicago in November. As I walked into our conference room, I could feel the tension in the air. All 40 employees were crammed into a space designed for 25, with people standing along the walls and sitting on windowsills. Marcus was holding court near the front, his voice carrying over the nervous chatter. "I'm telling you, this is about cutting dead weight. Companies like this always start with the bottom performers when they're in trouble." He glanced in my direction when he said bottom performers, and several people followed his gaze. I felt my cheeks burn, but I kept my expression neutral. In my bag was a 47-page analysis that could save everyone's job. But I was still just Harper Williams, the girl who nobody noticed. Robert Morrison walked in at exactly 9 a.m., his face grim. At 58, he'd built this company from nothing and seeing its struggle was clearly taking a toll. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice heavy. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Morrison and Associates is in serious financial trouble." The room went dead silent. Even though we'd all suspected it, hearing it confirmed felt like a punch to the gut. "We have approximately 6 weeks of operating capital remaining," he continued. "Without significant changes, we'll be forced to file for bankruptcy by the end of the year." That's when the finger-pointing began. The silence that followed. Robert's announcement lasted maybe 3 seconds before chaos erupted. 40 people suddenly had opinions about why the company was failing, and none of them wanted to take responsibility. "This is what happens when we take on clients who can't pay their bills," shouted Jennifer from accounting, pointing accusingly at the sales team. "Don't blame us," Marcus shot back, his voice rising above the din. "We bring in the clients. It's not our fault if the analysts can't deliver results that justify our fees." I watched this unfold from my usual spot in the back corner, feeling like I was observing a train wreck in slow motion. These were the same people who had worked together for years, who'd celebrated successes and weathered smaller storms. Now they were turning on each other like sharks sensing blood in the water. Robert tried to regain control. "Everyone, please. Fighting isn't going to solve our problems. We need to focus on solutions." "Solutions?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Robert, with all due respect, we're past the point of solutions. We need to start making hard decisions about who stays and who goes." That's when he turned and looked directly at me. I felt my stomach drop as his eyes locked onto mine with predatory focus. "I mean, let's be honest here," Marcus continued, his voice carrying clearly across the room. "We've got people on this team who simply aren't pulling their weight. People who've been coasting for years while the rest of us carry the load." Several heads turned in my direction. I could feel the weight of their stares, could see some people nodding along with Marcus's assessment. My hands started trembling and I gripped the edge of my chair to steady myself. "Marcus, that's not helpful," Janet, my supervisor, said weakly. "But even she wouldn't meet my eyes, isn't it?" Marcus stood up, clearly warming to his theme. "Look, I've been watching the numbers, and some people on this team are producing reports that are frankly useless. Busy work that doesn't translate into real value for our clients." He was talking about me. Everyone in the room knew he was talking about me, even if he hadn't said my name yet. "We're paying salaries to people who contribute nothing meaningful to this company's success," he continued. "And now, when we're facing bankruptcy, we're supposed to pretend that everyone here is equally valuable." Robert looked uncomfortable. "Marcus, I don't think this is the time for—" "No, Robert, this is exactly the time." Marcus's voice was getting louder, more aggressive. "We're 6 weeks away from closing our doors forever. We can't afford to keep dead weight on the payroll just because it makes us feel good about ourselves." The room had gone completely silent again. I could hear the heating system humming, could hear someone's nervous breathing behind me. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. "If we're going to have any chance of surviving this," Marcus said, turning to face me directly, "we need to start by cutting the people who aren't contributing." People like Harper Williams, there it was. My name spoken like an accusation in front of every single person I worked with. I felt heat flood my face, felt that familiar sensation of wanting to disappear into the floor. Harper sits in that corner every day, churning out reports that nobody reads because they don't contain anything useful. Marcus continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "She's been here for 2 years, and I can't think of a single significant contribution she's made to this company." A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but nobody spoke up to defend me. Not Janet, not the other analysts, not anyone. I was completely alone in a room full of colleagues who were watching me get publicly executed. Her work is consistently mediocre, her insights are surface level at best, and frankly, she's a waste of salary that we can't afford right now, Marcus said. "If we're serious about saving this company, Harper should be the first person we let go." The words hit me like physical blows. Mediocre, useless, dead weight, waste of salary. Each phrase felt carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage, and Marcus was delivering them with the precision of a surgeon and the cruelty of a bully. I mean, seriously? He continued, apparently not satisfied with the level of humiliation he'd already achieved. What has Harper Williams ever done for Morrison and Associates? Can anyone in this room point to a single project, a single client success, a single meaningful contribution that justifies keeping her on the payroll? The silence stretched on. 40 people, and not one of them could think of anything to say in my defense. Of course they couldn't. They never paid attention to my work in the first place. That's what I thought, Marcus said with satisfaction. Robert, if you're serious about saving this company, you'll start by cutting the obvious dead weight. Harper Williams should be cleaning out her desk by the end of the day. I felt tears threatening at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to. Let them fall. Not here, not in front of these people. Not while Marcus was watching me with that satisfied smirk on his face. That's when I noticed Robert Morrison's expression. He wasn't nodding along with Marcus's assessment. Instead, he was looking at me, with something that might have been surprise or confusion or ... recognition. Marcus, Robert said slowly, I think there might be some things you don't know about Harper's work. Marcus waved dismissively. Robert, I've been watching her output for 2 years. Trust me, I know exactly what Harper Williams brings to this table. Nothing. Actually, Robert said, his voice getting stronger, that's not true at all. The room's energy shifted. Something in Robert's tone suggested that this conversation was about to take an unexpected turn. Marcus's confident smirk faltered slightly. What do you mean? Marcus asked. Robert looked directly at me, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt like someone in this company actually saw me, really saw me. Harper, he said, do you still have that analysis you sent me last week? My heart stopped. The analysis, the 47-page document I'd spent 6 months perfecting. The comprehensive restructuring plan I'd emailed to Robert on Friday afternoon with a subject line that simply read, Potential Solutions for Company Recovery for your review. I'd sent it on impulse, figuring it would get lost in his inbox like everything else I'd ever submitted. I never imagined he'd actually read it. Yes, sir, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Good, Robert said, his eyes never leaving mine. Because I think it's time everyone in this room learned what Harper Williams has really been doing for the past 6 months. The confusion in the room was palpable. Marcus looked like someone had just told him the sky was green, his confident expression replaced by something approaching panic. The rest of my colleagues were looking between Robert and me, trying to understand what was happening. Robert, Marcus said carefully, I think there might be some confusion here. Harper doesn't work on company-wide projects. She handles basic account analysis for Marcus. Stop talking, Robert interrupted, his voice carrying an authority. I'd rarely heard from him. Harper, would you please come to the front of the room? My legs felt like jelly as I stood up. Every eye in the room was on me as I made my way through the crowd of chairs and confused faces. I could hear whispers. Starting behind me, people asking each other what was going on. When I reached the front, Robert gestured for me to stand beside him. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to meet the person who might have just saved Morrison and Associates. The whispers stopped. The room went dead silent again, but this time the energy was completely different. Instead of the hostile tension from Marcus's attack, there was now a sense of anticipation, of confusion mixed with curiosity. 6 months ago, Robert began. Harper Williams took it upon herself to conduct a comprehensive analysis of our company's financial situation. Not because anyone asked her to. Not because it was part of her job description. But because she saw problems that the rest of us were too busy or too proud to acknowledge. Marcus's face was turning red. Robert, I don't understand what the analysis Harper sent me last Friday is the most thorough, insightful, and actionable financial assessment I've seen in my 30 years of business. Robert continued, completely ignoring Marcus. She identified every single problem we're facing, traced them to their root causes, and developed a detailed plan for recovery. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't how I'd imagined this moment if I'd ever imagined it at all. I'd sent that report hoping maybe Robert would glance at it, maybe consider 1 or 2 of my suggestions. I never dreamed he'd read the entire thing, let alone present it to the whole company. Harper, Robert said, turning to me, would you mind sharing some of your findings with the team? My mouth went dry. Public speaking had never been my strength. That's why I'd always preferred to communicate through written reports. But looking out at the sea of faces, seeing Marcus's shocked expression, feeling the weight of this moment, I found my voice. I started noticing patterns in our financial data about 6 months ago. I began, my voice shaky but growing stronger. Our client retention rate had dropped by 23% over the past year, but we were still operating with the same overhead structure we'd had when we were serving 40% more clients. I could see people leaning forward, actually listening to me for the first time in 2 years. I also noticed that we were consistently undercharging for our services compared to our competitors, and our project completion times were averaging 30% longer than industry standards, which was eating into our profit margins. Marcus tried to interrupt. Harper, those are just surface-level observations that anyone could. Let her finish. Robert said sharply. I took a deep breath and continued. So I spent the last 6 months building a comprehensive model of our entire operation. I analyzed every client account, every expense category, every revenue stream. I compared our performance metrics to industry benchmarks and studied how similar companies had recovered from comparable situations. The room was completely silent now. Even Marcus had stopped trying to interrupt. The good news is that our problems are fixable, I said, feeling more confident with each word. We're not failing because we lack talent or because there's no market for our services. We're failing because of structural inefficiencies and strategic missteps that can be corrected. What kind of corrections? Asked Jennifer from accounting, the same woman who'd been pointing fingers 20 minutes earlier. I looked at Robert, who nodded encouragingly. Well, for starters, we need to restructure our service pricing. Based on my analysis, we should be charging 35% more for our core consulting services, which would bring us in line with market rates and significantly improve our margins. 35%? Someone called out. Our clients will never accept that. Actually, they will, I said, surprised by my own confidence. I researched our client satisfaction scores and compared them to our competitors. Our work quality is consistently rated higher, but our prices are consistently lower. We're essentially leaving money on the table because we're undervaluing our own expertise. I could see people nodding, actually engaging with what I was saying. It was a feeling I never experienced before. Being heard, being taken seriously. I also identified $180,000 in annual cost savings through operational improvements. I continued. We're paying for redundant software licenses. Our office space is 30% larger than we need, and we're outsourcing services that we could handle more efficiently in-house. Harper, Robert said, tell them about the investor. My heart skipped. The investor. The part of my analysis that even I had trouble believing. As part of my research, I reached out to several investment firms that specialize in business turnarounds, I said. I wanted to understand what outside investors look for when they're considering companies in our situation. Marcus finally found his voice again. You reached out to investors? Harper, you had no authority to. She had every right to research potential solutions, Robert interrupted. And it's a good thing she did. Harper, tell them what Meridian Capital said. I felt like I was in a dream. Meridian Capital is a Chicago-based investment firm that specializes in rescuing mid-sized professional services companies. After reviewing my analysis and our company's fundamentals, they've expressed serious interest in providing the capital injection we need to implement the restructuring plan. The room erupted. People were talking over each other, asking questions, expressing disbelief. Through the chaos, I could see Marcus staring at me like I'd just sprouted wings. How much capital? Someone shouted. $2.5 million, Robert answered. Enough to cover our immediate obligations, fund the restructuring process, and provide working capital for the next 18 months while we implement Harper's recommendations. But there's a condition, I added, and the room quieted again. They want to see the restructuring plan implemented exactly as I've outlined it, with regular progress reports and specific performance benchmarks. And, Robert said with a smile, they want Harper to oversee the entire implementation process. They were so impressed with her analysis that they've made her involvement a requirement for their investment. The silence that followed was different from all the previous silences. This wasn't confusion or hostility or anticipation. This was the sound of 40 people realizing that everything they thought they knew about Harper Williams was completely wrong. Marcus looked like he'd been hit by a truck. I don't understand. Harper, you're just an entry-level analyst. How did you ... When did you? When did I become capable of this level of work? I asked, finally finding the courage to look him directly in the eye. I've always been capable of it, Marcus. You just never bothered to notice.